Hey everyone, you're listening to Film Philosophy, where we break down the philosophies, concepts, and structures of filmmaking in the American film industry. We're filmmakers Tiffany Francis, Andrew Coles, and Nzinga Murray. Film Philosophy is brought to you by the Mission Entertainment. Today's episode features Kartik Hosanagar, and the topic we are tackling is using data to solve Hollywood's lack of representation. Kartik is the John C. Hauer Professor of Technology and Digital Business and a Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. His research work focuses on the digital economy, in particular, the impact of analytics and algorithms on consumers and society, internet media, internet marketing, and e-commerce. We chose Kartik because he has written and spoken about this topic in particular, and he has even created a company called JumpCut that intends to help Hollywood create more inclusive content through data. Welcome, Kartik. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Tiffany and team. Really excited to be here.
Let's jump right in. We're so curious about your background and how it led you to become interested in Hollywood's inclusion problem, and what made you connect using data to help solve it.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I stumbled into it. There's probably two sides of my work and personality which I never thought would meet. The first is that my day job is as somebody who uses data to solve business problems and who is also a business school professor. And then my evening and weekend hustle used to be back in the day before I had kids, go make short films with some friends. So I would convince friends to go stand in front of the camera, make short films, write, and so on. And so that was my, so the, just two aspects of my life, my personality that didn't really talk to each other much. They were like, switch one on, switch one off type of affair. And then one fine day, in this was back in 2010 when I just made tenure at Wharton School of Business at Penn, and it had been a very demanding few years on my way to tenure. And at the end of that process, I kind of said, you know what, I want to take some time off and do something I really have been thinking I want to do, and this is going to be for me. And I said I'm going to write a screenplay. So then I took some time off, took a leave, and during my leave, I wrote a screenplay. I went and met lots of producers. This was actually a screenplay for a Indian language movie, so I met a lot of producers in India. And because I was a professor at a business school, I was able to get access, which a lot of writers don't usually have. But I was able to meet the who's who of that industry, and yet I noticed that the standard response was one around, with, unless you've already packaged in a movie star in, it's going to be tough to go ahead, or what have you made in the past, um, or who are you connected to or with. And so it just felt like, unlike all of the businesses and industries I study, there was something unique going on here. There are all these gatekeepers who decide what gets made, and the gatekeepers don't know what's going to work, and
Mm.
so they fall back on gut and relationships and are not willing to take a chance. And the few offer, I did get one offer, and the one offer I had was basically that they wouldn't let me direct it, um, and that they would want to cast some big specific stars who I wasn't keen on, and they had their own vision of it. And so I gave up at the end of that leave, came back to Wharton, came back to my world. But because of this interest, and because I made a lot of connections with writers and directors during that period, I just kept those conversations going, including ones in Hollywood. And I would keep hearing this from others. And at some point, it struck me that maybe the problem I want to solve is not how do I get my movie made, but how do I help? There's a whole army of people who are looking to break in, and how can we democratize this industry? And the hammer I had was data and AI. And I know there's a lot of resistance to data and AI in the industry, but I felt like it could also be a source of good. Like, for example, can Data help de-risk a screenplay or a movie idea from a new storyteller. And so you're not willing to give a chance to somebody um, because no such movies have been made in the past, or this person hasn't made a big blockbuster movie in the past. But can data help de risk that idea? And so that's how it got started.
I love that. What are sort of the discoveries that you started to uncover as you like went through this journey?
Yeah, so a few interesting discoveries. The first was that data can help. And I found that based on analysis of lots of movies, lots of TV shows, there is signal in data on what's going to work. And of course, also the traditional Hollywood approach works, meaning that my analysis also showed that IP works. My analysis also showed that stars do bring people to the theater. And so I also understood why the industry falls back on the easy approaches, like instead of betting on an original screenplay, go fall back on a sequel, part five of a movie, or just a best-selling novel, or even just casting the same actors and so on. So I understood also why IP works and star talent works. But interestingly, I found that data can provide a signal that is as good as IP or star talent in an original screenplay that has no IP or no star talent. And you can have that level of certainty. So that was one learning.
That's incredible. Can we pause there for a minute just to
Yeah.
unpack that particular piece, because it's a fascinating conversation, I think, for us to have with you, having your background in business and having your background in data and AI and analytics, approaching a system which is notoriously gut driven.
Yeah.
And this idea of, oh, well, we think this is going to work, and there's, the sort of foreign sales model, which has really, come in popularity in the last years of, well, this, star is worth this much in these markets and we can pre-sell these rights. But just talk to us about what you uncovered, in terms of the ways in which falling back on IP or falling back on known talent works. Just because it's not a perspective we've discussed a lot. And it can feel knee jerk and reactionary sometimes to be like, why is Hollywood optioning podcasts and tweets and Reddit threads and comic books? But talk to us about what you discovered in this realm. This is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to dive into that. And it was honestly an interesting learning for me because I walked in with this criticism that Hollywood does not value creativity and there's no originality here and there is no willing to take creative risks and they just fall back on sequels. And I was like a critic of this. And then I was like, okay, when I did the analysis, I said, I understand economically at least why that's happening, meaning that at the end of the day, there's real money going into movies and
Hmm.
somebody's job is on the line when they take the money or when they put the money in, that, hey, we're going to get the money back. And the movie industry is inherently one of those hit driven businesses where the vast majority of movies will fail to break even, and the few that work have to then offset the losses of the ones that fail to break even. And so somebody's job is on the line in terms of make sure we don't lose this money when you're making this movie. And you take a chance the movie doesn't succeed, you have only so much rope now, and you take another risk, make one more movie that doesn't succeed. After probably two three of these kinds of failures, you lose your job. And so what do you do as a rational human being? You say, what's the safe bet here? And the safe bet is, do we know the story is going to work? And how do we know the story is going to work? Now, if you say, hey, this same story has worked in the form of a podcast, or this same story has worked with large audiences on one of the subreddits. I know a lot of movies have optioned from this subreddit called No Sleep, right, which is the horror subreddit. So
Hmm.
it's a story that's worked on No Sleep, or it's a New York Times best-selling novel. And so the first thing is you've de-risked the story. Maybe not de-risked every element of how you're going to visually tell the story, but just at a high level, what are the three acts, what are the key beats, what is the character's arc. All of those have been de-risked because people have responded to it. And not only have you de-risked it, you actually have some great market research because people have posted comments and you know what they liked, what they didn't like, which characters they liked, which characters they didn't like. And you walk in with that much more information with existing IP. And I think there, as I said, it's rational human behavior. If your job is on the line, you kind of say, let me de-risk this. And so that's one way to de-risk it. And my attitude is now that, okay, I get it. I get why you're doing that. But by the way, we are now in 2023. We're in a different world than even 20, 30 years ago. You can actually de risk original creative ideas also by testing with audiences at large scale, using the internet to run large scale tests, to even perhaps create short story versions of a screenplay, perhaps test it on
Hmm.
Reddit yourself as a studio or as a producer and see, oh, what are they responding to, what they like, what they don't like. You can run analysis of what's trending on social media to understand where the cultural zeitgeist is. So you can bring a lot of that in and get that same level of confidence, even if this is not based on a best selling podcast. And so some of the things we do are things like that, meaning going ahead and testing short versions of the story in on online platforms like Reddit and elsewhere, or testing ideas with audiences at scale that we recruit. And so we get a lot of that information with original screenplays as well.
Yeah, it's incredible, I think, because there are elements of some of what you're talking about in terms of, de-risking original ideas that we've talked about as strategies for emerging, creators and storytellers. And I think looking at this ethos of with the democratization of content creation and distribution, with the ease and access, and availability of high quality cameras and the ability for anyone, even just with an iPhone to film something, to edit it, to upload it. The idea that any of us conceivably has a studio in our pocket. It's interesting to just think about those strategies, which again feel very much how do I get noticed? And I think a lot of filmmakers or creators go from the idea of, well, let me work in these lesser mediums or these smaller mediums to then make something that gains the attention of someone who wants to adapt it into something bigger. But I think the idea of reverse engineering that process is really interesting to think about and from a data driven approach.
That's right. That's right. And for any creators, writers, directors, filmmakers listening in, the one thought or suggestion I have is, in my own experience in the last 3 4 years, I have changed my own view on um, how, as a creative mind, you should look at Hollywood's gatekeeping and lack of democratization. And one approach is to cry and complain about it and feel helpless and feel like the victim. Um, and I wouldn't blame anyone for doing that because I've myself been there and I understand how frustrating it is to s- spend so much time and effort on something and not even have somebody read it, let alone read it and say, here's why I'm rejecting it. Um, but at the same time, we live in a unique time where technology has democratized so much of not just content creation, but content distribution as well. And so, if you want to get, say, a movie made and you're not able to get that made, maybe there is an opportunity instead to make a short film on that with your iPhone, as you were saying, Andrew, and get it out on YouTube, or write the story version of it, short story version of it, and put it out on Wattpad or Reddit, and get that feedback, get it, improve it, and keep doing this until it starts to resonate with audiences. And all that's happening in Hollywood, because the amount of money is so much higher, they just want some way to have a a safety net somewhere. And if you can prove it's worked, on YouTube or on Reddit or someplace, and then you have a vision for how this works as a 2-hour movie or a 8 episode season, with that data, and now with that vision, that you have a shot.
Yeah. So you've been speaking about this for a little while. I've noticed a few articles from a few years back, and I'm curious, like, have you seen any actions like started to get taken from your reports and your encouragement to start using data to solve Hollywood's lack of representation?
Yeah, so by the way, that's the other learning I was going to get to, which is that I've realized that culture change is extremely hard and doesn't happen overnight. So even though I can tell you today that I am 100% confident that I can provide the data to say that this original screenplay is no more risky than this other proven IP, like, podcast or something like that, and I have the data to prove it. Culture change is not straightforward, because now I'm telling a system that is so used to making decisions with gut, saying, hey, trust our data. And not just gut, it's gut and relationships. So when we come in and we say, hey, we've got this kind of data, we've got this kind of approach, it's not like, the whole industry is saying, yeah, 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 we'll do it. But we've had, number of top producers in Hollywood, literally some of the who's who of Hollywood are our clients. We've had some studios as well work with us and try and get information and data on what they're doing. But sometimes I notice that maybe the decision is made mentally, and they're looking for the data to validate that. So I think that's why I'm saying that culture change takes a while. That culture change is helped a bit for us as a company by ChatGPT. My conversations with Hollywood companies has changed quite dramatically before and after ChatGPT. Before ChatGPT, a lot of people would say, "There's no way AI can match human intelligence. There's no way data can replace my 30 years of experience making films." And I used to always say, it's not meant to replace anyone's experience. It's meant to complement that, and it's meant to hone that, and it's where your experience combined with data creates something new that is way more powerful than each one alone. And even though we used to say that, there was resistance to using it. But I think once ChatGPT happened, a lot of people started to realize, wow, this stuff is much more than I imagined. Not only do they use it, but now we do it in more subtle ways. We don't try and give them box office projections. We don't try and do any of that, even though we could potentially do some of that analysis. But this is not a precise science, and that's why we don't do it today. And instead, we are helping them in other ways. Like, for example, producer might have, for every 2 scripts they read, 98 scripts on the site that they haven't read and that they haven't even touched because they have no time. And which two out of the 100 they picked is based on relationships, who sent them that script, and so on. So the other 98 are not being read. And so we have our AI read the script for them and generate the necessary information. And when they say we're looking for, let's say, an action comedy with two lead characters, and we can say, okay, we've read all the other 98 scripts that you haven't yet touched, and here are the 2 scripts that meet your mandate. Why don't you read it now? And so we're getting them that kind of information. So we are having AI read a lot of scripts. And when they know they're looking for something, we can say, hey, you haven't yet touched the script. It's time to look at that. Or if they worry, hey, the script is too similar to this other movie we're making, I don't want to read it. So the AI will read it and say, here's what's similar, here's what's different relative to your current slate. And so we can provide that kind of information, which is meant to complement them. We can also tell them information about, like, in addition to having AI read the script, to do audience testing and say, here's how audiences are reacting to the story concept. And so we provide them all of that information, which hopefully gets them to go out of their safe terrain of only looking at scripts and ideas by their trusted group and treading outside of
Hmm.
those waters a bit.
It's amazing to hear you say that. And I think what's really interesting in that is the most nuanced conversation around how AI can be used in terms of workflow. And so I think if we think about how Hollywood has traditionally operated, there have always been readers. There have always been people, whether interns, whether lower level executives, who read the scripts in the query pile, go through those 98 scripts that the producer at the top of the food chain is not reading. And so this idea, there have always been people who have been doing the work of sifting. I
Hmm.
think this idea of how can the sifting be more effective is really interesting. I came into the film industry right around the transition of paper scripts to digital. So when I began my career, it was the shift of bind my scripts and make sure there's a cover and have the brads, and I want it, double sided, and put them in my weekend read bag and pack it for me so I can take my read, on Friday night. To just email it to my Kindle or email it and I'll download it off my iPad, or put it in the Dropbox folder and it'll sync with my reader on my iPad. And so even just thinking about that technological shift and how it allowed folks to read more scripts, scripts to be sent around and trafficked more easily. This idea of how do we process more material,
Yeah.
and as you said, break outside of that feedback loop of, well, I've known this manager for however many years and we did this one project together, and so I'm going to prioritize their work. When the newer manager who's representing a clientele who might be a bit more diverse, who might be a bit more emerging, they don't have that working relationship. They haven't been at, the Palm together. They haven't built the same relationship, but there's a story there that can fit a mandate. And I think in some ways what I'm hearing is there's a way to use AI to streamline workflow that might help in creating more access or giving stories that actually fit a mandate or actually valuable more of a chance of being read and processed. And I think in terms of, having spent the last 10 years representing emerging storytellers who come from historically underrepresented backgrounds, one of the most difficult things is getting people to read. So from the prospect of where I sit, putting my manager hat on, if you're making the proposition, it's like, hey, there is AI that is going to process a script, going to spit out relevant insights, going to give coverage, which is not necessarily going to compete with an intern or an executive's read, because AI can't tell me how it's going to make someone feel. It's like, oh, I just really loved the language. I just really loved when this character said this. This character reminded me of my uncle and he spent some time in prison. And so I think this is really true. AI can't do that. But in terms of processing information, in terms of summarizing, in terms of, creating an easy way for a creative mind to then come in and say, oh, there's something that might have merit here. I should put my own eyes on it. It really sounds revolutionary.
Your point about this is about changing the operations of how, say, agencies, management companies, studios, production companies are run. That's at the heart of it. And inclusion access is one of those benefits, but not the only one. And it's, in fact, you could even argue it's a side effect here. Because
Mm.
what's happening, I mean, to use your example, and one of our clients is an agency that probably has a bunch of interns, junior execs reading lots of scripts. And at any given time has more scripts coming their way than people to process them, even with
Hmm.
interns and junior execs. They, first of all, have more scripts than they can process. Secondly, they don't have persistent institutional knowledge. Because what happens is interns come and go, an intern read the script, knows what it is about, wrote a coverage, kept it somewhere. It's in somebody's email inbox. It's lost when that intern's internship left and it's gone. And the senior partner agent has not read it. And so that knowledge is kind of lost somewhere in ether. We don't know who has that
Mm.
information. It's not available anymore. And also, the coverages, for example, that are being written by interns are not consistent. One is writing one way, one is writing another way. One is trained well, one is not trained well. And so if you look at this problem, more scripts than you can process, no persistent knowledge in the organization, no consistent way in which you're analyzing those scripts. AI addresses those three things. And so you come in and you can process all scripts that come in the same consistent manner, and then have it all stored in some place where you can have simple natural language question. A manager or an agent can go in there and just type in a question and say, hey, my actor client is looking for this kind of a script, what do we have? And the AI system can respond and say, here are the five we have. I mean, think of CAA, WME, they've got so many agents. One agent doesn't know what other script is sitting with another agent, and there is no consistent way to even find that out. It's all, let's grab coffee, what do you have, what do you not have, and so on. That's the way it works. Instead, if I can just go and type in there and say, what do we have, here's what my client is looking for, it shows you these are the five scripts. Now you say, okay, give me the character arc for these five scripts, give me the short coverage for these five scripts. You get it. And now you kind of say, okay, I like this one, now send me the script, and I'm going to read it. And that's the way you've cut out what would have taken you weeks to identify that script that exists somewhere in the system, and you process it. And so first and foremost, what happens is you save so much time in what would have been just grunt work or meetings with no value, that you can now allocate towards the most creative things, towards how to make the script better, towards how to get your clients the best jobs out there, rather than spending all your time on what I call the grunt work over here. And so it saves you time. And then you've got all these other side effects. Ideas get assessed based on their merit and not based on who sent them, how well you know them, whether you had coffee together 5 times in the last year, and all of that. Instead, any great idea can come in. And I think it gives people who aren't currently included in Hollywood a chance for their stuff to also be in front of these agents. And finally, also, these agents, they're servicing their clients, but there's so many people who want to sign up an agent, right? There's so many aspiring writers who want to sign up an agent, and they're sending those scripts, and the agent doesn't have enough time to read all the from all the submissions. And now the AI can help with that too.
Awesome. Imagine that, a world where they're basing things off of merit. It sounds simple, but it's like, it kind of is a little bit mind blowing, to be honest.
It is, because I think in some ways it's not how Hollywood operates in this moment. And I think there is the presumption or the assumption that the workflow in Hollywood makes sense or is the most effective that it could be, as opposed to, yeah, no, this is actually a system that's about 100 years old, and like some things have changed, but a lot has not, and the underlying fundamentals are, still pretty basic. And in terms of how much capital it takes for some of these projects to, be produced and be distributed and be advertised, there has to be something better that we can evolve into. And this, in some ways, feels like that evolution.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, script processing hasn't changed a whole lot in last several decades. The only progress might be what you're talking about now. You can read it on your Kindle, which is actually progress, because you can do it at your convenience. But then, we're about taking it to that next level. And I remember one of the agents we were talking to initially was very skeptical about whether AI can read the script well. And we said, you know what, try this out yourself. We're not going to do anything. Here's a demo. And by the way, any of your listeners can go to our website, which is www.jumpcutmedia.com. Scroll down, and at the bottom, it's a bit hidden, but you'll see the link to this demo called Script Sense. And if you upload a script to Script Sense, then you'll get an email back with a sort of like a coverage of the script. So it's actually scriptsense.jumpcutmedia.com, and that's not our full product demo. It's just the AI's ability to read a script. So the AI will read the script and send you a few things: a log line, a synopsis of the script, the key beats in the script. It'll give you each of the major characters and things like the demographics of of the characters and what's their the arc over the course of the story, and then the comps, which movies is this most similar to. And our product
Wow.
has much more than that. It can also go in and, like I said, just ask an English language question and say, out of the 500 scripts that I uploaded here, is there any that meets this particular need that we have? Things like that. And so anyone can just try this for free right now, and you will see, wow, you get very consistent, high quality notes um, on these massive documents. And it's high time, Hollywood sort of starts to adopt that and increases efficiency in there.
Well, thank you so much for laying all of that out for us, Kartik. Like, it's so interesting to hear all this. And I did have another question in terms of long-term effects of all of this. And you've already kind of spoken about AI, but I think AI right now is a very top of mind controversial topic.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people are using it in good and negative ways, so I think there's a lot to discuss
Right.
and dissect there. But in terms of AI, like, how can you help us understand it right now, and also like how do you see it impacting creative industries? And we're also talking about how, like, obviously writers and actors right now, and everyone's fighting for different rights to not have AI affect their jobs. What do you think are the immediate and long-term concerns with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about over there. Let me start with what I think are the concerns there, and then maybe I want to talk a little bit about what will be AI's impact, or what could be its impact in creative industries. So first, in terms of the concerns, look, while I'm saying we leverage AI and data to solve important problems in Hollywood, there are big concerns too. And I think the immediate concern is the kind of concern that has come up with ChatGPT, where ChatGPT is trained on a lot of data, where the company OpenAI did not license the data, and trained the AI on that, and it's now creating content based on data that it got without formal licensing and without creator permissions. So the biggest concern I would have as a creator right now is around um, consent, credit, and compensation. And I think anyone who is building AI models has to do it responsibly and address these three concerns, which is, if somebody's data is used to train an AI model, it should have their consent. They should have credit. You should have an open listing of these are the data sources used to train our AI model, and there should be compensation. So if if my creative work is in an AI model, first of all, I get to decide whether it's in there or not. And secondly, when an AI model is now creating content based on that, I get royalties from it. And I think that's important. So
Hmm.
that, I think, is the sort of immediate concern over the next 5-10 years. I think we're like at the Napster moment related to AI, right? I mean, I remember when I
Hmm.
moved to the US from India around 99, 2000, that was when Napster came out and everyone was downloading music illegally on Napster. And the music industry came to crack down on it. And, the industry shrank so dramatically because of peer to peer file sharing. But eventually, when the industry embraced the technology and the convenience and its value, and created some standards around it, then the music industry came back to the same old size through all these new streaming services. But of course, some of the value shifted towards the technology companies like Spotify and others. But I think, again, if the music industry had been actively pursuing this, they could have created their own Spotify instead of fighting it for so many years and eventually having tech companies own a big share of the market. I think the same goes with AI here, which is AI has got a very important role to play. And I think if the industry engages, creates standards around AI, creates consensus around AI, and then starts to build AI solutions that are compliant with what the creators want, I think that's the way to go. I also feel like, personally, I feel the concerns of the WGA were right. But at the same time, I think the ask shouldn't be AI. can never be used in writing because there's so much value that AI provides. And also, there is an avalanche coming towards you. You can't just say avalanche should stop because it's out of your control, but you can kind of put the safety in place to protect yourself. You can do those kinds of things. And so I think that's what we should be doing. So that's the short term concern, which is around
Mm-hmm.
consent credit, compensation, those kinds of things. I think the long term concern, of course, in my opinion, is today, no AI can write a great novel that'll move us. Today, no AI can write a great movie screenplay. But we are talking about exponential change with technology. Is it possible that AI will be writing amazing novels, amazing screenplays? As a technologist, I'm going to say it is possible. I'm not guaranteeing it to anyone, but I'm saying it's not only possible, but it's highly possible that we'll get there. And so, what happens to creative jobs? I think that's the big long term threat. And I think, again, the good news is, for example, now I'm putting on my hat as a researcher at the university. Our research shows that given AI produced output and human produced creative output, people prefer human produced creative output for the same quality levels, right? So people prefer that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if we look at what makes us human, ultimately it's our creative pursuits that make us human. So I don't think we'll ever let that go, whether it's consumption of creative stuff or creation of creative stuff. We'll never let that go. So the question is, how do we create the kinds of AI that can be great writing companions for writers, for example? So instead of fighting the AI, it's your writing buddy. So where you would have written a screenplay with somebody else, now you write it with AI and you wrote it together. Or if you're writing it alone, sometimes, and this happens, like I've been in this boat now through my company where we're working with writers, and there's a deadline. They're not able to get the screenplay revision done on time because they have a writing block or something. Use the AI as your brainstorming buddy, and work your way out of that writer's block, through that AI companion. So I feel that should be the future, where AI can be a support for writers, but the fear is that economics and capitalism could push it in the direction of mass use of AI, which I think would be terrible. And even though I run a data and AI company, I'm highly against that. And I think, again, we have to engage collectively as a society, as an industry, and create the rules around how we'll use AI. And for that reason, we don't use AI in writing. We use AI in improving the workflow, in making sure the scripts are being read, or getting audience feedback and so on. And we intentionally currently don't use AI for writing because one of our missions is to empower creators, and we don't want to be in a position where any creator sees any of our tools as a threat. And so we explicitly don't use it for writing. But in the future, the industry will, and I think writers should also, but perhaps use it the way they might use Microsoft Word, or or anything else. Microsoft Word is doing spell checks for you and spelling corrections. Could it go to the next level, where when you are stuck in a writer's block, it gives you 5 ideas on 5 different directions you could take the story? Or when you're stuck about the ending, you kind of get a few ideas from the ending, and you decide. You have agency as a writer in terms of where you take it. I feel that's the, again, solution to that long term challenge, but that is the long term challenge.
What I love in this is it's such a nuanced point of view, that you're bringing forth. And I think, to just reflect back what I hear, it's yes, there is the danger and the inclination that with the corporatization of entertainment, and with filmic art, that those who are worried about return on investment might use AI as a shortcut to try to generate consistent results that will allow them to take the safest bets possible. That outcome leads to less authentic creative expression and is a troubling scenario. The upside for creatives is there is now launched a tool that is constantly evolving that can help take whatever creative insights and instincts that you have and augment them. and the idea of AI as a tool or as a companion as opposed to a foe. I mean, again, I think for those of us in film, we're thinking about Hal. We're thinking about, oh, the AI is going to do this. And it's like, this is a really powerful tool in the way that the internet is a tool, in the way that any of these other research or information based tools can be helpful to us. And what I think is exciting about what you're saying is there's the opportunity for writers, creators, artists of all sorts to streamline their workflow, to find a way for new ideas to come into their sphere of awareness that they can then build on with their instincts. And I think a really interesting example of this interplay, which I've seen a little bit, is there's a video which I watched a little bit ago of the rapper Lupe Fiasco, and I forget which AI tool he was using, but basically, he's a wordsmith, he's a rapper, he's a poet, he's incredible. But he had an idea and then he fed it into AI, and he's like, well, what are some directions that I can go in this? And we'll put a link to that video in the show notes. But it, for me, was just a really interesting example of how someone who is at the top of their game was able to use AI to generate new ideas and was still piloting the ship, but had, a co-pilot who was helping them, chart the star course.
Co-pilot is an excellent term, and that's my vision for what AI should be, as a co-pilot for human creators, where humans have
Hmm.
agency and the AI is a tool. And I think that's the way to go. And I think to the other question that Tiffany asked me, which is, what is the likely impact on Hollywood or in general the creator economy? You know, I think it's going to have such a dramatic, significant impact. On the one hand, we know that internet increased the number of people who started creating. Digital tools in general increased the number of people who started creating. Somebody in the music industry told me that around the internet, the membership of the music industry organization went up tenfold, thanks to the internet. I think AI is going to again increase the number of creators, because now you've got so many more tools that simplified. You've got a great idea. Now you've got the tools to convert that into something real. And so you're going to have a massive increase in the supply of creators. And when you have a massive increase in supply of creators, that's going to have other kinds of impact. Like, for example, there's internet has already created a content explosion. And so for whatever you're looking to watch, there's something there on YouTube. Now the question is, how do you search for it and find it? And so what's going to happen is there's going to be an oversupply of content and creators, and there will be a premium therefore on discovery and influence, right? So any content creator who merely creates and hopes to get discovered will be at a disadvantage relative to creators who also have a relationship with the audience, and kind of build that connection with the audience, and they will have an advantage with discovery. Unfortunately, algorithms will play a big role in content discovery as well. And then also, like, look, I think if there are more creators, there will be more competition for any creator as well. And so that's also going to happen. But I do fully believe that at the end of the day, authentic human created content, high end content will always survive, because I think that's at the heart of humanity, and that's my belief. But I think huge changes are coming, and I don't know that it's happening in the next few years or next year or two, but I think video is also going to have its chat GPT moment. And someday somebody who's got a great screenplay, who's not able to convince Hollywood studios to give them the 10, 15, $20 million needed to make this movie at a great production value, is going to use AI and spend a tiny fraction of that and create an amazing movie with great production value and be able to distribute it. And so I think some of the gatekeeping and the barriers for creators will also drop as a result of this. So there will be a lot of good, there will be a lot of bad too, and I think we have to navigate all of this. And the more we embrace this and shape it, the better position we'll be versus just resisting it and not participating in the conversation of how are we going to use it and how do we want this to be a part of our creative world.
Just to put a point on that, we always, think for, or for our audience and for our listeners, this idea of, okay, what's actionable? What are the takeaways? What can we think about? I think what I'm hearing and what you're saying right now is this is happening. If you are an emerging storyteller, if you are an emerging creator, if you're a creator from a historically underrepresented background, there is a sea change that is happening in how information is shared and how stories are created. Learn this tool. And I say this as someone who just started playing around with ChatGPT this weekend. So, I will raise my hand and say I've been somewhat resistant. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about all this. And just spending some time exploring and planning, I was like, oh, there's so much value that I can unlock here that can impact the business, but also my own creative pursuits. And, I would say, from everything that you've shared, it's like for our listeners, for those who are on the come up, it's like play around with these tools, explore this, see how it works for you, see how you might integrate it into your workflow. Because as you said, this avalanche is coming. Let's figure out how to roll with what's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well put.
Kartik, do you have any last philosophical musings or inspiring thoughts on this topic before we end?
Well, maybe my last thought is going to be probably just a recap of some of the things we've been saying, but it's going to be this idea that look, the history of technology has always been a history of change and our ability to handle change, be comfortable with change, and be part of shaping that process. As an example, if you look at the history of photography, which we consider an art form today, when photography came out, there was a huge concern that this would be the end of paintings, because at that time, that form of art was about capturing reality as well as possible. Portraits, or you look at paintings from the 15th, 16th century, whether it's a bowl of fruits, how realistic is that painting? Once you've got photography, then you kind of say, do I really need to paint that photorealistic painting or not? And people thought that would be the end of that art form. And instead, what happened is Impressionism came up. And the idea that, hey, a photograph can capture that reality, but a photograph cannot capture the feelings I had when I saw that reality. And what I'm going to paint is not what I'm seeing exactly as it is seen, but instead the impression it creates in my mind. And it had led to the emergence of a completely new art form. And so when we look at technology with fear or new art forms with fear, it's natural and it's happened repeatedly. But it is also a tool that is going to create a completely new form of art where people are going to take, whether it's writing, movie making, and all of that into a fascinating new direction. And I think my whole message to everyone is it's easy to get scared by this. It's natural to get scared by it. But we all have a tiger in us, and it's time to unleash that tiger. And unleashing that tiger means I will take it head on and see how I'll tame this tiger and make it work for me. And that is what I'm kind of advocating for everyone. Whether it's a creator or even a Hollywood exec who might worry that, hey, if AI can read a script, what am I supposed to be doing? And even for them, I'd say, look, you're going to go to the next level because the AI will do the simple job of reading. And now you're going to go and have the time and the space you need to take your craft of producing, of reading, of assessing a script to the next level. So let's all do that.
Beautiful. Beautifully put. Great ending to our podcast. Thank you so much, Kartik. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Tiffany.
Wow, what an amazing conversation with Kartik. Just really incredible to think about where the industry is going and the ways in which technology will present, obviously, some challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. Our website is filmphilosophy.com. That's film and then philosophy with an F.com. You can go to the website and the show notes for educational resources. And our contact information, if you wanted to ask questions or follow up or let us know how the episode made you feel, our email is filmphilosophy.tme@gmail.com. We encourage you to send us audio messages by email so we can play it back on our podcast. And if you're shy, all good too. Thanks so much for listening. We had so much fun with this topic that we kept talking after we wrapped the episode. So please enjoy some bonus content from our chat. You can find it on our website, filmphilosophy.com. Again, that's film and then philosophy with an F.com. This is Film Philosophy, and we'll see you next time.